educators of Virginia. Welcome to today's episode with John B. Gordon III, or Dr. JBG3, where we will explore the importance of understanding the context of our data, the wellness of our students and staff, and the political polarities between which schools are wedged. John is the superintendent of Suffolk Public Schools, the co-creator of the Executive Coaching Program for School Administrators, and author of the Teacher's Lounge. Hold on 1 second, I got something. Yeah, I got my own copy right here.
Like that.
In the shot. I'm thrilled to be able to sit down with a mentor, a role model, and a friend. We are all in for a treat. John, welcome. How are you?
Doing well, man. Doing really well. Really appreciate the opportunity here, Dr. Jones. Always has had great partnerships with ASCD and the local affiliate DASCD. So I'm excited to be a part of this opportunity.
Awesome. I appreciate you carving out time. By now, our listeners know that I don't let our guests get by with a "I'm doing well" or "I'm doing fine." I really want to unpack that, man, given all the things that are going on all around us, all the things. And it's a lot. We could stack them up if we wanted to, but I really want to check in with you. And when I ask how you are, I mean it. How are you?
Yeah, I mean, I know that because I know you very, very well. I'm actually in a really good place. I mean, if you would have talked to me a couple of months ago, it may have been a little bit different perspective because, we were going through transition at the state level, different administration coming in, which means different policies change over the General Assembly, et cetera. But, I've been in this role now for 2.5 years. And so, I have a great comfort zone. And so it's just really about making sure that we continue to do this work.
That's awesome. No, I appreciate that. You're killing it, man. I get to watch you from afar, and I get to talk to your people every once in a while. Like last week, I saw a group of your people, and just high marks, and you're killing it, man. So I appreciate you. Everything that you do for me personally, I definitely appreciate that. But what you're doing for students in Suffolk and particularly across the Commonwealth too, because you're a leader and an advocate at the state level as well. And so I appreciate that. I too am showing up well. I'm in a really good space. I'm transitioning into this role and really get to lean into my skill sets and my talents and what I feel my strengths are has been a blessing. I mean, today my backdrop arrived. So like, this isn't a virtual backdrop, like this is legit back here. So I'm hyped and I'm excited, but I'm really thrilled to get started talking with you and recording this podcast and really getting to know what your thoughts are on a couple of things that we have coming up. So we're going to start because so many things that we talk about as we're going to take a look in a brief look in the rear view mirror. We're not going to live a lot in the rear view. We're going to really take a note of those things in the rear view mirror and the things that we should keep in mind as we kind of set our sights on what's right in front of us through that windshield. So today I'm excited to get your thoughts on 3 of those topics. And we're going to start with data. That's a hot and exciting thing to start a podcast on, data, but let's dive into it. So many educators are worried about outcomes data that measure all levels of performance for this year. What's in your mind and on your heart when you think about that information, what that information means, how we should interpret it, and what its value is moving forward?
I think, that's really a double-edged sword question, because people can really try to find or use data to provide evidence for whatever your original train of thought was. And you can really use data to support any level of evidence. So like here in Virginia, I think the biggest concern is, going actually back to the 18-19 school year was our last quote unquote normal year. And I know that even at the state level, they're going to be comparing not only student achievement data, but also chronic absenteeism, et cetera, to try to be able to push whatever the agenda is. So for us as superintendents, it's really about more of a focus on growth and more of a focus on making sure that our staff and our students are actually healthy coming to school. Because if you don't have kids that have that mental well-being, that social emotional health itself, we know that they can't focus. And I think one of the things that a lot of people forget about is that also includes the health and mental well-being of the staff too. Because if your staff is not doing well, and we know we are in the middle of what people are calling the Great Resignation, right? Like this is a key time over the last 18 months or so where the field of education is being decimated. And it's being decimated not only for health reasons, God forbid it was being decimated for death, but it was also being decimated because of the change that we had to do. Like we literally had to flip our entire system on its head within 3 to 6 months. And if this was any type of level of Fortune 500, any large organization, that would be unheard of. But that was what was really asked of us as educators. And I think one of the positive things that actually came out of the pandemic was that people actually began to see the impact of a teacher. And they realized it's not easy. And when parents were at home observing, or they had to do additional support for homeschooling their kids or any home support at all, they also realized that the teaching strategies and pedagogy that they may have been exposed to when they were students is totally different now.
Yeah.
Right? Totally different. So for us, when it comes to data, I'm looking at each individual kid, right? I'm not going to compare cohort to cohort. That's not fair. I'm not going to even compare the kids that were in virtual learning versus the kids that had face-to-face instruction. Like here in Suffolk, for example, last year, we were on a hybrid model and we didn't start that until March. So my elementary kids had the opportunity to have 15 days of face-to-face instruction, and my secondary students only had 13. I mean, when you add that up or compare that to the 180 days or the 990 hours that we normally would have, because this is the data I'm giving you, Dr. Jones. Once we take a look at that, you can see that you have disproportionalities, especially if you take into consideration other variables, such as what type of broadband or Wi-Fi or internet access do they have. Like here in Suffolk, and two of my more rural boroughs, there is actually one cell phone tower for like 110 square miles. And so we had to do different things, such as convert our parking lots into hotspots. We gave out 1,000 MiFis. I mean, you had to do different things just to support the fact that the infrastructure itself wasn't there. So not only are we missing face-to-face time, not only are we having issues with kids having to be able to adjust to virtual learning, but then once that opportunity is presented itself, you don't even have the infrastructure or broadband to teach. Or if the kids turns on the video, it sucks up all the data so they can't get their afternoon classes. I mean, those are the things that all superintendents are looking at, plus trying to find ways to retain their staff while hiring new staff. That's the big change. This is why you are seeing a lot of divisions being pretty innovative. We have locked in student teachers early, right? I have created sign-in bonuses for our tough to fill positions, and even doing the same things for bus drivers and things of that nature. But when people can make more money in the private sector, it creates an issue. The data point I'm going to give you is in 2019, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, there were a total of 12 math graduates in the whole Commonwealth, 12 of them. And 9 of them went to the private sector because they could make more money. And you can't blame them. You can't blame them. So what can we do? Because this is a different generation here. This generation likes to be entrepreneurs. This generation likes the comfort of being able to set their own schedule and work from home. What can we do to make being a part of this educational journey, joining the field of education, cool again? This is why we need organizations like VASCD, leaders like Dr. Chris Jones and others to really help to push, hey, if you can have the greatest impact on so many lives by being in the field of education. So that is something that I'm really taking a look at the data, not only the total number of vacancies we have, but what has been our success rate when we've tried different strategies to get our talent in and keep them here in Suffolk.
Man, there's a lot to unpack there, good sir. So, I want to, so you're telling a big part of the story that's beyond the data, that's deeper than the data, that's, when one part of it is the testing data, when you're talking about looking at each kid and their growth, and even with that, you're looking at a deeper story and really recognizing that if you're trying to compare, there's no way to compare apples to apples right now. There are no apples to compare these apples to, because this is so unique. And so looking at every single kid, I like what you said, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into the Great Resignation and what you're talking about with teacher shortage. And I look to you for a lot of things leadership, and so I just, with the Great Resignation, let's live in that space for just a minute.
Okay.
What is a leader's role in that? I know you talked about, what innovative things that you could do to bring the folks on, the different things that you're doing, even with pay structures at the building level. at the department chair level, even at the central office level with that leadership? What is my responsibility as a leader in this thing we're calling the Great Resignation?
Yeah, I think it really begins with patience and empathy. I think those have to be your two foundational thoughts. Patience with understanding that people are stressed because human nature, human behavior, I mean, you're talking about a former psychology major here. Anytime you introduce a new element, it causes some level of stress. But as we mature, our ability to cope with it is what makes us adults and what makes us strong. But everyone copes with things in different levels. So you have to be able to have patience, because sometimes people want to just be able to talk and to vent it and to get it out. But you also have to be able to have a lot of flexibility and empathy, because we have asked so much. For example, my 1,100 teachers, I asked them to all be Google certified when the pandemic first hit, because I knew that virtual learning was going to come there. So I'm trying to be proactive, not only to help their technological skills, but also to protect them from any parent or any student saying, well, you don't even know how to operate this program anyway. So how am I supposed to be able to learn from it if you're struggling in the logistics and the day-to-day operations, right? So it was about giving additional training, because the technological skills are now with such a larger part of the teacher's pedagogy, right? Yeah. The empathy piece also comes in because we had to learn how to completely be flexible, right? Teachers, staff members, students being quarantined. So now, not only are you teaching the kids that are actually there in class or actually there on the screen, but you also had to really develop a sustainable plan for those students who were missing days, who may not have been feeling well, who may have had a death in the family because mom, dad, aunt, whomever it was may have passed away and they couldn't focus. So a lot of staff members were feeling like they were always playing catch up. And for some individuals that knew they were closer to 30 years or knew that it really wasn't going to be a big difference in their retirement pay if they went out right now, right? Educators go out 2 points during the year, July, December. And it really all depends on how your financial system, your savings were set up. But it puts a larger burden on the school division for those individuals that go out in December. So leaders had to make adjustments at the building level, at the central office level, because you may have had a change in your staff from when you went out for winter break, December 15th, from when you came back January 3rd. I mean, those things happen over that 2-week time frame where you may not have known that people were going to leave. I remember one of our people, this is right before the pandemic hit, but one of our people set her resignation date for like December 23rd. And I'm like, we're not even in school, you know? But it's just how people's mental mindset was and being able to cope and to deal with this. So at the building levels where I'm always going to start, that patience and empathy and that flexibility is going to be so key. But at the same time, you also had to show that you were going to be the role model and take on that leadership position of, I can help you and I can do it too. I had several principals that were filling in the cafeteria, teaching classes, doing whatever they needed to in order to make sure that the day-to-day operations of the school was continuing with the least impact on the students and the parents. But then you also had to be able to balance, okay, human behavior again. Why is it that John Gordon is always out and I'm always covering his class? You know, then I had to balance that, trying to minimize any divisiveness between the staff for those that were healthier or were there more frequently than others, and then losing your planning period because you're covering class. It can sometimes lead to, you know, layers of resentment, or you definitely want to make sure that you stayed away from the central office not being tied into what's actually happening in the schools. You know, what extra supports can be put in place, because a huge burden was placed on your custodial crew who had anxiety about being the ones that go in and disinfect. Okay, a huge burden was placed on your transportation and your food nutrition services department. Those two had to basically be married and partnered together so you could deliver meals out into your community. What happens if you miss a stop? What type of meal package are you going to have? 3 day, 5 day, 7 day? And is it things that people actually want to eat? I mean, all of that really played a role into kind of what we looked at as the operational and logistical side of a school division. And that is where we focus. And then once we brought staff back in, one of the things that the Department of Education kind of had me lead a little session on was being able to provide childcare for your staff.
Mm.
We partnered with Alphabets here in Suffolk so that all of our teachers, because we knew I had to bring you back into my building because number one, it made it easier for monitoring. Number two, fewer distractions at home. And number three, I could guarantee the broadband in my buildings. But I also knew those parents also had kids themselves that were responsible for, because those kids were now virtual. So I partnered with Alphabet as our child care provider, and we paid for the child care for all of our staff. Unheard of, unheard of. But small things like that allowed our staff to see that we were empathizing with them, that it really let them know that we understood, hey, your life, your personal and professional life just got married because we're on virtual learning and your kids are at home. So because your kids are at home, you still need to be able to make a living. What can the school division do to support you in that process? So I think that's a great example to use on how we had to look at things from so many different lenses in order to be able to come to a conclusion that supported everyone. And then you have to be able to communicate it effectively so there's no confusion.
Man, so I love that approach to really taking care of your people. And one of the things that you touched on is really coping skills. In your earlier response, you talked a lot, well, not a lot, but you mentioned, staff and student wellness and really looking at the context of wellness. And you're touching on it a little bit here with what you had to do and what the role of leadership was in the Great Resignation and all the things that you did to mitigate it and to turn that around. So as we kind of change our gaze from the rear view mirror to the windshield, that a mental health crisis has emerged alongside the many challenges we faced since March 2020. It's hard to believe it's been 2 full years. What do you see as big areas of need and big areas of focus for supporting both students and staff moving into the upcoming school year?
I think you got to really almost take a look at things in worst case scenario mode. And that's like hard for guys like, you and I, because we're forever optimists, right? But one of the things that I've noticed, I'm gonna use a middle school student, for example, right? Middle school students are already going through so much because their body is changing.
Mm-hmm.
Sixth grade, they come in talking like this. Eighth grade, talking like that. I mean, you know it, right? For the guys, you know it. And so then we're gonna also introduce, I can't go hang with my friends. There's a fear of catching COVID. There is still going to be exploration of the person's sexuality because they are growing and they are having new experiences and new feelings. And without that social ability around them, how is that being manifested? And then because the lack of social time has really been taken away from them, the key is, what is it being replaced with? Because kids are still going to find ways. This is why you saw so much more traffic on social media and Snapchat and Instagram, because kids were using that to substitute from the conversations they were having with their friends at school or the teams they were playing on. So then when we began to reacclimate them back into school, they're still keying to the way they used to communicate during the pandemic, which then leads to more cyberbullying, which then leads to more things that are happening online that are having a direct impact on what's happening in the classroom. That's the transition that we're going through right now, all right? With staff, you have those individuals that were clinging to the way that things were, right? Just clinging to the way that things were. Well, back in 16, 17, I could do, they were just clinging to it. And now, because we've had to adjust, like literally, once we came back to school, that was the new ground zero. Yeah. Like anything that happened before that, but besides the institutional knowledge that the teacher had, or the fact that the kids were still the same age that you normally were teaching, everything else was different. Everything else was different, especially if you're down here in an area like Suffolk, where you already had a transient population in some areas because of the high military component. And because of the effects of the pandemic, how your McKinney-Vento or your homeless student percentages and populations went up because people lost their jobs and homes because of the pandemic. I mean, those were the things that I think all school divisions are kind of still dealing with as we're coming out of this. Like, I was so happy when I looked today that our numbers are finally like in the yellow and green, right? But it's still an adjustment period. And I think the federal government was really on to something, because they knew that it was going to probably take about 3 years to kind of come out of this. This is why all of the CARES Act and the ESSER funds and everything was in 3-year windows. That was strategic. That was strategic. But that was going to be on the average side of it all. For those of us that were dealing with kids that had, lower levels of socioeconomic status, all of those issues were actually magnified. And so that worrying, right? That worrying of the kid not knowing, okay, now that they're not delivering meals anymore to my neighborhood every 3 to 5 days, my parents decided for me to be virtual. And so I can't go to school and get the food, but we don't really have enough money to get the food because dad got laid off because the plant cut back. I mean, those are the things that I like literally think about. That's what I mean about the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And you really get a lot of perspectives by having conversations with the kids. A lot of superintendents may have, I have a superintendent advisory council, right? A lot of superintendents may have leadership groups and councils and things of that nature, but are you actually using it to put things into place? We recently changed our dress code, and the last group of people that I spoke to before we put it into place were the students. And that's hard for some folks because we do have a percentage, I'm sure this is every school division, we do have a percentage of adults that still think it's about them.
Yeah.
And and it's not. It's really about the kids and making sure that you keep the kids first in every decision you make. And that's hard, especially when you're kind of looking at the political side of it all.
And that's what I appreciate about you so much is always the question is, what's best for kids? We got to be thinking about kids within this. So I appreciate that so much, especially as we start to think about this upcoming school year and the coping skills and that transition that you talked about from living in a digital space. The way you communicate on Instagram through the comments or how you see somebody, interacting with somebody else on TikTok is not what we're expecting to do in this face-to-face environment. So that transition is definitely mandatory, if not important. But for this last question that I have for you, because we're already about 20 some odd minutes in. So this last question I have for you is about the climate and giving the considerations of the climate. And it's no secret that our schools are wedged between all the polarities that exist in our national culture right now, especially here in Virginia. What are important things to keep in mind as we continue to move forward with specific emphasis on the political climate?
So, every political candidate always uses the field of education as a platform on some level, right? But it was easier to use it during the pandemic because, again, the field of education was the one that had to adjust more than anything else. And so now we know the political promises were made, and whoever the successful candidate is wants to make sure that they come through on those political promises, but you have to make sure that you communicate to the people that it impacts along the way. That doesn't always happen. Then when you take a look at the overall climate with race relations and tension, that's a challenge. That's a challenge for people because I literally had a constituent, older white guy, that told me that systemic racism is over. How was an older white guy who just admitted in his speech that his kids went to private school and then they went to UVA, like I did, and they're doing so well. But then if I go talk to some of my other students who are living in Section 8, they have a totally different perspective, especially when you look at the court system here in Suffolk and the majority of people that are there are people of color. But it was just a mind-boggling statement that he wanted to make that, affirmation that systemic racism is over. How do you know if you've never experienced it? Like, how do you know? I literally have people that treat me differently if I'm in my athletic gear, Chris, than they do when I'm in my Joseph A. Banks suits. Oh, Dr. Gordon, we didn't recognize you. Oh, I know you didn't. It was the suit, right? I say it all the time because I wear a sweatsuit on purpose. It was the suit. It was the suit that makes it a little bit different. So when we're talking about that context, that climate and the culture, we still have to be able to get past a lot of the stereotypes, right? We still have to be able to see things from other folks' lenses. And that's hard to do because that makes people uncomfortable. This is part of the reason why the term equity all of a sudden was looked at to be divisive because we were actually making progress. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to me how once you're making progress, that's viewed as a threat. It's viewed as a threat so that we don't have the private school mentality in the public school sector. And I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but it's actually the truth on why some decisions were made. Because you had different representation. I know for a fact that the demographics of my school board creates tension for some individuals. And then when you take a look and the school board clerk is African-American, the school board attorney is African-American, and the superintendent is African-American, for some individuals, that's just too much. I mean, I literally had people tell me, you know, I've been here 2.5 years. When I was hiring and promoting people, close folks gave me the heads up, you know, people are counting, right? And I go, counting what? How many people of color get hired versus how many white people get hired? I'm like, damn, this is 2019, 2020, and that's still being discussed. So when you take a look at it all, you have the context now of people using words to spark and stir the pot, right? You don't want you indoctrinating my child, right? I don't want this divisive behavior. Have you ever went through your child's phone to see what's actually on there, to see what's being indoctrinated? You know, I mean, that's the part you got to take a look at, because in my opinion, schools are supposed to be an extension of the home. But people get nervous about that, right? Racism isn't taught in schools. Like when a kid, you know, we're talking about tabula rasa here. When a kid is born, they are not born innately racist. So where do they pick it up? And the sad part is that our kids these days are so much more open. Sexuality doesn't bother them. Racial tension isn't there as much as it is with the adults.
Right.
That's the challenge. And so when I have like literally told people, because you know, I do Facebook Lives. I just did one last Friday, right? So anytime we have a major decision, I'll give an opportunity for the school community to interact with me directly, hear answers from me directly, and I also get a chance to hear things from them. You know, they submit questions in advance, but I also take a look at the questions that are scrolling and the comments as we're going down, right? When that situation happened with George Floyd, and I wrote a post about my 16th birthday, driving my mother's Jaguar, and we're on our way to Regency Square Mall, and a Henrico County officer pulls me over because we look too young to be driving that car. And even though they had the City Hall sticker in there, because my mom was the math specialist for Richmond Public Schools at the time, and I pointed out to the officer that the last name on the registration was the same one. But he still pulled us over. Told me I wasn't speeding, but he just wanted to check it out. Because I told that story, I literally had people here in my locality say, you got to watch what you post. What? Because I'm telling you a true story? All those true stories is in that book behind you right there, Dr. Jones. I mean, these are experiences that, you know, we go through. But because it made people uncomfortable, I was given the warning. All it made me do was want to write more. That's all it made me do. But I mean, that's kind of what you're talking about here with just the overall climate. Education is 150% political now. It really is. And the sad part is a lot of people don't see the middle ground, right? The middle ground is the kids. It's not your politics, it's the kids. But a lot of people don't want to see that because they want to still be able to control the narrative of what they want the kids to learn so that when those kids become adults, they can preserve that same line of thinking. That is what we're fighting against. And that's where we're going in.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end the podcast than you dropping the mic like that. So, Dr. Gordon, I appreciate you always taking the time. You always drop nuggets for me to take away, and I've got a couple of notes that I took throughout that just for me to take away from. So I appreciate that, and on behalf of all educators tuning in, thank you, Dr. JBG3. And VASCD would like to give you an opportunity to share with the community how they can connect with you and become part of your learning network.
Yeah, you know, always you can follow me on Twitter at DRJBG3. I try to really kind of separate things, in my world where my Twitter feed and of course LinkedIn, Dr. John B. Gordon III is really everything I do professional. I say Facebook for family stuff and really just promoting my kids. I want people to see, because I know that I serve as a role model to a lot. I want people to see this 30-year-old, soon to be 31 in this month, year old son of my son Marcus, who I had as a senior year in high school, that beat the odds because I was a teenage dad. Now he's doing extremely well working for Anthem. And then my oldest daughter, Kennedy, senior at Deep Run High School, has gotten into every school she's applied to, just became a thespian, has a solo and chorus, doing well. And my youngest daughter, Simone, is 7th grade volleyball star. I want people to see that my children, because of the things that their mom and I have put forward and the support system we have in place, is what's making them successful, regardless of what the circumstances is. So I kind of use Facebook to really promote my kids for that. And Instagram is just me and my own private stuff. So
Sounds good. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Lots of knowledge and some really deep insight from Dr. Gordon here today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Deeper Insights. We'll see you next time.